very quick. We've done workshops. We've done a joint webinar. My point of all this is we've worked very well with you and would like to do the same going forward. Very quickly, there has not been a school bond since 2006. There was a bill this year. It did not pass. The governor is in the process of looking at how school facilities are funded in California. It's a new thing for our industry. The point in this context is that schools don't have a whole lot of funding, particularly now for these types of programs if UST pops up that they didn't anticipate. And so we very much appreciate being included in this program. I guess the point is that now more than ever, it's very important. I did want to say a special thanks to Lisa Babcock and her staff for including us in a substantive way in these in the stakeholder outreach, and we look forward to, it's a long program, 10 years,
Right.
and so we look forward to working with her in the future. So to come down to it, we support the approach that the staff is taking in terms of the amount of funding. We know that this, in terms of the first question Ms. Spivey Weber asked, the first one, right? How many are there? What is there? And there isn't any central repository of that. Unfortunately, that's something that we as an organization are dedicated to doing, and my colleague, Ms. Garner, will talk about less generally than I am. We are working towards getting this information because it will be not only important for you, but Lisa mentioned that this will go through the budget process. Mm-hmm. Certainly, they will ask questions about the universe, all those types of things. So there will be no doubt that we will be needing to put more of this information together. We tried to do some of that with AB 120. Didn't get as far as we wanted to. It was during a legislative session, and you know, just didn't have enough time. So we support the approach. There's two things that do give us some comfort in terms of we don't know exactly what's out there, and there's some there, you know, all the calculations that are being made now. The fact that it goes through the budget process and there's opportunity for input, and also that the legislation specifies that on an annual basis, stakeholders can come to the water board and maybe be more precise with that information. Going forward, there will be likely more applications from schools. We don't have a bond. Also, under the new state education funding program, one of the pieces that's required as a state priority is to look at good repair, being required now to keep schools in good repair. In that process, I think some of these tanks will be found. And so, but we are confident that working with the staff, managing the actual need over 10 years, that we think we can, everyone will benefit there. And finally, the issue of outreach to schools. That's something that my organization, I won't, it's very obvious what needs to happen here. It's not only outreach to the schools, but it's to the right people in the schools, right? If you're really going to give an issue like this to the superintendent, not necessarily going to be addressed right away. So we can help with that as well as working with some of the other education organizations to raise the profile, the school boards, the teachers, the administrators, others that we work with on a daily basis. And so we'll certainly work with Lisa and her staff to do that. And so we're excited about the program. We'll be following it very closely through the budget process, and we'll certainly be here every year letting you know how it's working. If we think more funding will be coming down the pipe. If not, but again, the data. We know it's the hardest part, but it's a very critical piece for you as well as the legislature, and so we're going to work on that.
That's good. I'm delighted to hear that. I was going to ask you some of the questions you had even answered in your talking about the fact that you exist and will be helping schools, which have an awful lot of things on their plate, a ton
Sure.
of things on their plate. And so doing some of the facilities issues or environmental issues has sometimes seemed like a luxury to them. And it's good there's money here, but when you
Right.
think about a long-term 12-year, 11-year deadline, it could be that folks want to put that off because they have other things to do. And so hopefully there'll be some kind of strategic pacing, and having you as a partner trying to fix that will be
Between
helpful.
us, we're going to try to scare them. No, I mean, all jokes aside, to basically communicate what you said, that this is a serious thing. This is not a luxury. anymore, much like some of the stormwater permits and so on. Schools, it's a tough culture to change. It isn't our first thing, but we know it's important, and water important in particular for schools, as you can see working with these programs. The profile this year has just,
Huge,
as in many other areas, just shot straight up, and it doesn't look to be diminishing. So thank
Well,
you. And
that's
again,
great.
we
Thanks.
offer cash as a resource in this. We think we can do some good work here. So
Terrific, appreciate
Good.
that, and
Okay.
the cooperation on drops, too. That's great.
outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Garner? Equologic or Equalogic?
Yeah,
I like
Equalogic.
that.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you. I'm Susan Garner, and I'm the president of Equalogic, and I'm a professional geologist in the state of California, and I've spent at least 30 years working with underground storage tanks over the course of my career. I also have been an elected official, and so I had some experience with legislation, and I worked with Joe Samedian on AB 1478 to extend the funding. At that time, there was about $18 million left in the special school district account, and it was use it or lose it. And so with Joe's help, we were able to extend that to 2016. And obviously now with SB 455, that's will be, the school district account has the opportunity to be replenished for the next 10 years. I also worked with the fund staff and Assemblyman Alejo on Assembly Bill 120, which changed the eligibility requirements for schools primarily around permitting, because school districts are not in the business of underground storage tanks. They did not keep records that would go back sometimes, to the late 80s or early 90s, which bumped them out of the fund. And so now with AB 120, they are required to show proof of permitting starting in 2003. So these old tanks that they didn't know existed, they're able now to get funding to be able to clean up their sites. So just generally, why do school districts need this money? It usually comes around two issues. One is that they have a bus or maintenance facility where they have an underground storage tank or had an underground storage tank. That's the first issue, and the second are old heating oil tanks. So those old school facilities that have been around since the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, frequently have heating oil tanks that they may or may not know about. It's not uncommon for them to start construction in an area and do an excavation and come upon one of these old tanks that they didn't even know that was there. So I also support the fund's position in terms of how to approach the special school district account. I think what's important is that we can show a commitment towards schools of around $4 million a year. That's what we've been spending. If we look back to the beginning of when the funds, the special school district account started in '09. So that would mean in 2016-17 and beyond, we would be looking for about 10% of that $39 million. Certainly we'll have more information as we get closer to that. Schools do not have discretionary funds right now for compliance issues. And so what we find with schools is that, I've actually helped about 12 to 15 school districts get their funding in the last few years. What we find with schools is either they ignore regulatory compliance issues, or they're trying to scrape together, funding to comply. And whether they comply or don't comply just depends on the school. So, the whole teeth around compliance is another issue, but I'm not suggesting we pick on schools, but because they don't have the funding, but I think it's also important that they comply because kids are at those sites. So I'll just throw a few numbers around based on my research. Using GeoTracker, which is the state's website where underground storage tanks, leaks on underground storage tanks are posted, there are about 700 cases. There are about 150 letter of commitments that have gone out to school districts. That doesn't mean that they've necessarily been funded. Those are just the numbers, and those are approximate numbers. Today, there are 55 active cases on GeoTracker, and that's doing a sort on schools and a sort on USDs. There's not if you just sort on schools, you're not going to get all the schools. You might get a school popping up under bus, or you might get a school popping up under maintenance, and like I said, or unified. So but I think 55 is a good thumbnail. Of those 55 cases, 24 are currently funded. Through earlier discussions with the fund, I'm understanding that the active spending, the average spending is $300,000 to $500,000 per site. Although you'll see sites that go up to $1 million or 1.5, and you'll also see sites that are, 50,000. So it can be all over the place, but 300, 500, I think is good for budgeting purposes. So of the 31 current active sites at 300 to 500, that's $9 to $15 million. And that does not include sites that may have been recently closed, and I know of sites like that out there where they've never applied for funding, or upgrades at maintenance facilities. I think that whenever you go to a maintenance facility and start digging around, it's not unusual to find something that needs attention. Or during new construction projects coming upon an old heating oil tank. I agree with Ian Padilla and Lisa Babcock that outreach is critical. I find that schools have what I call fund fatigue. They have tried to get funding in the past, they've been denied. Sometimes they've tried again, and then it's still denied. Because the legislation has changed, they're not keeping up with the nuances and the change of legislation, and they may not believe me that now I can get them money. And so sometimes that's a hard task.
No, really, this time we should put at the beginning, no,
we
really,
can get it for you
of
this
all of
time, I'm
information?
telling you. And when I get it for them, they are amazed. And in fact, I can tell you stories like in Salinas where they used that money to build a stage. They always wanted to have an art stage. And because that's money that's coming back to them that they have spent on other things, sometimes they can keep a program in place, they can keep a teacher, or they can do something extra for their school district. And those are really nice stories. So
And now you should probably wrap just because.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I go over? Okay. So
No, it was helpful, though.
But pardon me?
It was helpful. I
Oh,
appreciate
okay, good. Well, so I think an outreach program will be critical just to let school districts know that the funding is there and that things have changed. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you very
Okay.
much for joining us. Those are all the cards we have. Lisa, anything you want to say before we take a short break? And then
Just
do
that
our final two items.
I believe
Three
that
items.
the board meeting just in Los Angeles area on the 16th, I believe we'll hear from additional
Right.
stakeholders.
Yeah.
I think we'll hear from quite a few.
That's
And
right.
so this was a helpful start.
No, it is. I appreciate the folks coming from the schools. My wife's an elected school board official, and so I know that in that district, the institutional memory on facilities is virtually none. And so I can just imagine that as a statewide story. That said, we didn't hear really any, and I appreciate the input, but we didn't hear a lot of insight or input into this new site cleanup account. And I'm sure a lot of folks have some ideas about how it can be used. Can you remind, again, you gave the criteria, but really when this was going through the legislative process, I was under the impression that this was going to help us with some of the, lack of a better term, orphan sites, places where the community doesn't have resources, there's no potential responsible party. So it kind of was a shoring up fund for the RUST program in some ways. Could you comment on that? Or you received comments in the stakeholder meetings about the disposition of this account, briefly?
Okay, so that is what the site cleanup sub-account is really for, it's, the requirement is that the responsible party does not have the resources to respond to a requirement. And then it has parameters on, to consider in terms of, how the board funds those.
But, this is really the thing that's going to help us to deal with
Yes.
the cases that have been on our desk for 2 decades in some cases, right?
So just to jump in, there's really 2 parts to it. There's the part to address those previously identified orphan sites that need money to clean up. But there's also a universe out there of sites that need to be identified and a responsible party identified. So there are also money so that we can actually do the work to get them into the cost recovery program. And so there's two pieces to it. One is grants, which would deal with the real orphans. One is state funding, state staff to go out and do the identification of sites that, and find the responsible parties.
That's good. You know, this really dovetails even with, you know, the water plan discussions about the feasibility of using groundwater as a storage solution for long-term sustainability of water resources. You know, I know we're in underground storage tanks, but this has a place in terms of sustainability and the utility of groundwater basins that right now may not be useful, but in the near future could be, thanks to this additional funding to help deal with orphan sites that don't have funding to clean up.
Right. So there are in the site cleanup program, which is the non-UST program, there are over 3,000 cases that are open inactive, which means that the regional boards know they exist. They've been working to try and do something, but they haven't had the staff. They haven't had something to charge to pursue looking for RPs, et cetera, nor to get those cases into the cost recovery. And an additional piece that is staff time, but it's also that similar to the EAR program, the Emergency Abandoned Recalcitrant Program we have for the USTs, we have contracts that the state board manages with a consultant who goes out and does work at the direction of the regional board for doing investigations and cleanups at UST sites. So one of the things that is an option as well is if you don't find a grant applicant for some reason, there does need to be work. And if a regional board is willing to put in the extreme effort it takes to participate in this type of work, we can do that kind of grant as well, or contract as well, where the regional board actually directs the work at a site. So it's this is something we've been looking for 20, 30 years, right? Some way to address those cases.
That's great. Thank you. That was useful. Okay, I know we have 3 more items. 2 in particular. We have folks waiting, but we need to take a short break, and we'll be back within 10 minutes max. Right. We'll reconvene. I just hope that's not an ice cream cake. I keep waiting for it to tilt. All right. Hello. Item number 7.
Good morning.
Still good
Chair
morning.
Marcus and members of the board. My name is John Russell. With me today is David Ceccarelli, who's the chief of our fees unit. Just as a refresher, at the September 23rd board meeting, the board members requested that staff bring back to them, I'm sorry, is this better?
Yeah, great.
Staff deliver a more robust stakeholder engagement process for the fees unit. And I wanted to clarify, I think the title of this was water quality fees, but we're really talking about both the water quality fees and the water rights fees. So it's a comprehensive process. In general, the board asks us to increase the opportunities for stakeholders to provide us with information and to provide more opportunities for the stakeholders to provide. You asked us 2 things. One, for additional opportunities for us to provide information to the stakeholders, and another opportunity for the stakeholders to actually provide information and feedback to us on the fee setting process. Specifically, you asked that we provide additional information to stakeholders, additional transparency, additional time for stakeholder discussion and input with staff, additional opportunity for dialogue with the staff, and additional opportunity for meetings with the staff. And a little bit later in my presentation, you'll hear what the stakeholders, we've been meeting with them and what they've asked, and it's almost the same thing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the process that we propose to engage in, and I wanted to say right up front that some of the parts of this process are still conceptual. I didn't want to get ahead of the game and come to you with a concrete plan without first engaging in some talks and some dialogue with the stakeholders. I didn't want it to appear as if we'd made up our mind and this is what we're going to do without having the second half of the equation, which is the stakeholder input. The other thing I wanted to point out is that this stakeholder process is going to build on what we have in the past. I've worked in a number of different programs at the board, and the fee process stakeholder groups that we do have are actually fairly robust compared to some of the other programs I've worked in. So we're going to try to improve on that process. We're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater and start completely from scratch. We want to build on the good work that we've done already. And also we want to build, as you saw at the September 23rd board meeting, we have a very involved group of stakeholders willing to come and dialogue with us and provide input. So that's good. And again, the process that we're proposing is sort of the standard stakeholder engagement process. It's tried and true. You're not going to look at this as we're in it or a year from now and say, ooh, that was an innovative program. Sometimes the simplest tools are the best tools. So we want to address several different things during the process. You know, what is the purpose of the stakeholder process? And I'll get into all of these in a minute. Who are we engaging in with the stakeholders? How are we going to engage? That's probably the key part that I'm going to talk about. And then as we're going along, we want to try to set some interim performance measures to try and gauge whether we're doing what we intended to do. So we already talked a little bit, or I talked a little bit about the purpose of the stakeholder process, and you laid that out. You know, what do we want to achieve? And those were the things that we just talked about. Additional opportunities for dialogue both ways for both sides to engage in a dialogue. Going along with that, we wanted to identify the central issues that we wanted to discuss and resolve, and we've already started doing that a little bit. Since the meeting, we've talked to several of the key stakeholders of the various groups that we work with. We've talked to our own internal stakeholders, our program staff. We're proposing to do a little stakeholder survey to get that information back from them on what information they would like out of the process and what outcomes they would like out of the process. So the second part of that is, who do we want to engage? Who are our stakeholders? We've looked at that a little bit, and obviously the board staff were at the table, but the half of the board staff that were at the table were the fees group. A lot of the things that we're hearing both from you at the last meeting and from the stakeholders is that they want more input from program staff. So we're going to do that too. We're going to facilitate some meetings where we get program staff to the table with us. And program staff, those are some of they'll be able to provide more of the information on sort of the nuts and bolts of the program. What are the regulatory, what does the regulatory program do? What does that staff do? What services are the fees paying for, in other words?
What are the cost drivers?
And what are the cost drivers? And David and I, I'm going to say we're not totally ignorant of that aspect, but we believe that the program staff themselves are really going to be key to being able to explain that.
And will you be inviting regional program staff?
We will. In a couple of the
Oh, good.
programs,
Good
the
question.
program is actually mostly out in the region. For example, the confined animal program. Then we're also looking at the fee payers themselves. Are we engaging? You've heard from some of the fee payers, and like I said before, we have a very involved group of fee payers for the most part, but we're not quite sure we're reaching all of the fee payers. We've been assured that we have been reaching some segments, such as the very smallest fee payers, but we're not quite sure. So we're re-looking at that a little bit just to make sure. There's other groups that we are not involved yet, and we don't know really if they even want to be. For example, the environmental justice groups, we're going to make some invitations to them, and just so we hear from all, at least provide them the opportunity to participate if they want to. That does present some challenges to us. We don't have one stakeholder group per se. Even in let's just pick on the water quality group, there's multiple programs in that group. There's landfills, there's irrigated ag, there's a lot of NPDS. There's a lot of different interests in that. So that's going to be one of the challenges we're going to be facing is working with that number of groups. Who you heard from last time was primarily agricultural interests for the most part. So we're proposing to start working with them initially as sort of a pilot project.
Well, yeah, they were the ones that had chunks. Last year it was Stormwater Day,
Exactly.
in addition to ag and.
So we're not proposing to ignore any of the segments of our stakeholders, but on the other hand, it's likely that all stakeholder groups won't get the same amount of our time. And that's simply primarily just a resource issue with us. There's David and myself and Glenn and Sarah, and we have other things to do in addition to the stakeholder groups.
Have you started trying to coordinate with the cost of compliance teams? Because they already have set up multi-stakeholder teams to talk about a very related issue.
We have started that. We started working particularly with Eric in ORPP.
Good. So that just would augment it. You don't need to reinvent all the wheel.
Exactly. That's, yeah, we're not intending to start from ground zero with all of this.
And speaking of not reinventing the wheel, I think it is included within the general categories here on the list, the attachment that you have, but calling out information and what information is out there and what information gaps are there. I did have a good discussion with Ms. Turkovich about the performance report and, doing what you can to direct stakeholders to maybe more completely utilize that report and seeing what we can do to hear back from them about is there more, what's missing in that report, and whatever is missing, how else can they obtain it? Does the performance report need to be expanded, or are there other information tools that they can utilize?
Right, that's a good segue into what I was going to talk about next, is how we're going to propose to engage. And that was one of the things in our preliminary talks with the stakeholder groups, the representatives, that, like I said before, they generally wanted the same things out of the process that you had requested of us. They They requested that we meet with them earlier in the fee setting process, that we provide additional information, some of the things that you just alluded to, both in general and in specific on how fees are set, what are the regulatory programs doing, that sort of thing, what information is out there that they can look at. And then they also wanted, and this is, again, the second half of the equation, is additional opportunity to provide information to us. And it's just, they didn't want a one-way, and we don't want that either, a one-way dialogue. Here's the way it is. So we're really looking at increasing that information flow back to us from them, as well as providing information to them. So at an absolute minimum, that's what we want to do, is keep the stakeholders informed. Some stakeholders, that's all they want, is just to be informed to the point that to know what's going on. So to do that, we're looking at emails. We're looking at using our LIRIS list more. We have 3,000 to 4,000 names on our LIRIS list that we can provide information to. We're looking at updating our web pages, and we're also providing a monthly update in the Executive Director's Report to you that's available to everybody on our website. Like I said, informing people, though, is just the minimum that we want to do. Ideally, we would like to consult, involve, and collaborate with our stakeholders so that they feel that they're a part of the process, and not just that they feel they're a part of the process, but they actually are a part of the process that we go through in setting these fees. So again, we're going to rely on our LIRIS list, and then emails and web pages, but most importantly, we're proposing to rely on face-to-face meetings. And that keys back to your request and their request. Talk to everybody earlier in the process and throughout the process. So we're proposing to have a set of face-to-face meetings keyed to when the governor's budget, the various iterations of it, are released. So we're proposing middle to late January, after the Jan 10 budget comes out, middle to late May after the May revise comes out, and then probably July and August when that comes out. We're also proposing, and we've sent out a save the date message here, to have a meeting in December, a webcast that'll be sort of a budget process 101 for all the stakeholders, just so we're all on the same page and we all understand what the governor's budget process is. What we can and can't talk about. That came up in our last meeting. There's going to be things that, parts of the budget process are confidential. We're not going to be able to talk about. But you've identified a number of issues, and the stakeholders that have identified a number of issues that we have plenty of to talk about, that we can stay away from some of the more confidential things. And what we can talk about in those various meetings.
Keep your mouth closer to the, just move it closer to you. You don't have to move to it.
So there's things that we can talk about in our fund condition, and basically that's our revenues versus expenditures. Some of the expenditures we won't be able to talk about because they're tied to budget change proposals that may be in the governor's budget. But we're constantly tracking our own revenues, what we think they'll be, what we anticipate they'll be, and our known expenditures. So based on that, we can come up with anticipated fees, and that's a big part of what the stakeholders have requested. Can they kind of get an inkling of what our fees are going to be earlier in the process, so that they can do their own business planning, and it doesn't hit them halfway through their fiscal year.
So a clarification, John, because I have to get closer. Previous or past expenditures, we have information on and can share with stakeholders. Projected expenditures that may be linked to things that are still being proposed as part of the budget process is something that's confidential that you wouldn't be able to discuss.
That's correct, but we will be able to know what a certain percentage of our expenditures will be, just on what our staff is now and what we're spending. So we can discuss the known.
Okay.
We can't discuss other things that are confidential or the unknown things that, occasionally something comes up at the very end of the fiscal year. We get a new augmentation or something. So that's really the key to what we're proposing. And let me... Is this working better?
Yes.
All right. And also what we're proposing is like I said before, have program staff either in those meetings with us or have separate meetings with program staff to explain some of the nuances of what we've been unable to really explain adequately in the past. A lot of the stakeholders have said, for example, we understand that this program has 10 PYs. We understand how you financially allocate costs to those 10 PYs or personnel years, but we just don't understand why you need 10 staff to do whatever this program is doing. And that's what they've asked us on the program side to come back. You know, what inspections are you performing? What permits are you writing? What are you doing to protect water quality?
And now I'm looking to Ms. Turgovich, because that's what the performance report is supposed to convey, and if it's not conveying that, then we've got to address it.
Exactly. And so one of the things that Ms. Diadamo and I discussed was what information was actually there, making that information more readily known, and assisting folks to understand what more, or to provide us with input on what more or what different type of information are they interested in receiving as well. That report is a wealth of information, not only on the work that we do, that our staff does, but on the costs associated with all of that work, broken down by regional water board, state water board, and then rolled up statewide. So there is a tremendous amount of information there that Rafael Maestu and Eric Oppenheimer have pulled together with the assistance of programs across the organization. So we just have to find a way to get that information out in a better way, but also to make sure we're providing the information that's most useful, because otherwise the report is nothing if it's not useful.
No, yeah, it's just having a massive data doesn't make, and so there's a combination of that and conversation.
Another key thing that the stakeholders requested is that we don't just have our meetings here in Sacramento, that we go out throughout the state and hold several, so that the, and this was particularly from the agricultural community, that they can attend some of these meetings without having to travel, you know, halfway across the state. So we do intend to do that too. We're planning 3 or 4, again, north, central, southern parts of the state. And that's a minimum. It may turn into more. I want to go through a couple of the preliminary identified issues right now really quickly, and the first parts of these are ones that came from you at the last meeting. Basically, again, you asked us to consult with the stakeholders themselves to see what they wanted out of this process, both in terms of outcomes and in terms of the process itself. We've started that a little bit. We're going to do a little bit more of that as we go along. One of the things you requested is, and we heard from the stakeholders too, is that our process seems to differ fairly markedly from other state agencies. We've started checking into that, and they brought up the Air Resources Board and California Department of Food and Agriculture as 2 processes that they liked. So there's 2 halves of that. We're going out to talk to the agencies themselves to see what they do differently, but we also have to talk to the stakeholders and see, why do you like that particular agencies? What is it about them that you like? And then beyond that, if there are things that we can incorporate into our process, that's what we intend to do as well. And David can talk a little bit more about that right now if you would like, or we can go on.
I think we should
All right,
go
so
on
let's
just
move
'cause
on
of
really
the number
quickly.
of folks waiting, and we have a number of speakers too.
Yeah, so one of the things you also requested is that we help you develop a better understanding of the confined animal facility program in general and in specific. Again, David and I are probably not the best people to help you
Of
do
course,
that, so
right.
we've been coordinating with our own regional board staff on that. That'll probably come back to you as either an informational item or a white paper of some sort.
You
And
could
then
do that. You could just do briefings too. I also think I meant to ask this before. I'm sorry. When you go out and do the meetings in the field, you'll take program staff with you too.
we will.
Because the more meetings our folks have out in the field, the better. Just being able to listen and understand and be able to converse and develop relationships with
Right.
folks about what we're collectively trying to do, honoring both.
Right.
And with respect to the CAFO program, I would suggest, I'm sure you're already thinking along this line, but also reaching out to the stakeholders who are involved in that program, asking them for thoughts and ideas on maybe even questions that they had regarding that program, but getting thoughts from them in terms of what sort of, what sort of, how would they, what questions they would need to be addressed, and how would they convey the challenges, successes, and costs associated with that program?
That's a good idea. And ancillary to that, you also asked us to develop a better understanding of the quality assurance program that the dairies do. What are the costs to the dairies? What are the benefits to the dairies? What are the benefits to the regulated community? What are the benefits to us if a facility is under a QAP? Are there water quality benefits to that? And then another ancillary was the whole waiver issue. Are we regulating facilities
Right,
under
I thought of
waivers
that.
differently
Right.
than those under permits?
Right.
If we do have to charge costs for the waivers, what should they be based on? What are the benefits of waivers versus permits and all that type of thing? And then the stakeholders themselves have, like I alluded to before, basically asked for a lot more information on the regulatory programs. And some of that, again, is contained in the performance reports. But it's also, you heard some of the complaints that at the last meeting, we're paying a fee, but we really don't see any regulatory presence. Or we don't know who our regulator is in a lot of cases. We just send in a check and that type of thing. What are we actually paying for? So that's where program is going to be very, very helpful to us to explain, what we're actually doing on the field in the regulation of these facilities and how we protect water quality. That's all I had. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions? Thank you for the approach you're taking, and we can always do even more, but that's a pretty hefty set of meetings and objectives, so hopefully that'll make some progress. But let's hear from the speakers. First I have Bob Gore, followed by Danny Merkley. Oh, there he is.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How's the mic working? Okay,
Just
good.
get closer to it.
That's really uncomfortable, you're right.
It's awkward. That's
Yep.
why I have to pin this to myself.
Unaccustomed as I am to anyway.
Yeah.
On behalf of a diverse group of stakeholders from the Gualco Group, and I think you'll appreciate the folks for whom we speak, Kings River, Kern, Modesto, Imperial, San Gabriel Valley, San Bernardino Valley, and the newest water district in the state, Paso Robles. We'd like to say thank you for the unanimous support for a transparent fiscal process. And we also view this as part and parcel with the continuing cost of compliance efforts. We appreciate the impetus for a strong stakeholder input and meaningful guidance in this process, especially at a time when there's climate change mitigation, volatile revenues, and unprecedented regulatory environments. It's a good time to be brought further into budgets and cost of compliance. As the chair said, what we most appreciate is that this is not about numbers on a page, but establishing trusting relationships and partnerships going forward. And we look forward to our collaboration. We look forward to producing a product that's about results and outcomes as opposed to programs. And we'll work forward. We'll work with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Appreciate your help on this and all those other efforts. Danny Merkley, followed by Bill Thomas. I like your card, by the way. Has a guide, practically a glossary.
I was
Good.
getting bored.
It's good, it's good. I'm not sharing it with anybody, but it's good.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the board. Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau Federation. First of all, I want to make it very clear, we've been very pleased with the staff and the fee unit. Me personally, working with them over the years, they've been very good at providing information and answering questions, very responsive. And then Darren came over there, and then we...
But he's gone now.
Yeah, but seriously, they've been very, very good to work with. There's some disconnects, and I'm encouraged by what I just heard presented this morning, or early this afternoon. Look forward to working with staff on that process, on that framework, without getting into the details. I think that's something we need to do, working with staff, and I look forward to doing that. And part of that, I think, is looking at the performance report, or I think that's what it's called, performance report, the annual one. Looking at that, seeing how we can make that more meaningful and more helpful, and provide maybe information that it's not able to at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great. Mr. Thomas, followed by J.P. Cataviella.
Madam Chair and members, Bill Thomas, pardon me, representing the South San Joaquin Water Quality Coalition. We've been very involved in the fee setting and coordinating with your staff since the Irrigated Lands program became a part. And I'll mirror Danny's comments that this has been one of the most open and responsive dialogues and meetings that we've had. I've said that before in front of you, Tam, when you were
So it's a
chair.
good start.
What's that?
Good start.
But
just a start.
But the staff, when we're dealing with the staff, the budget's already determined. The cost side of the ledger is fixed. It becomes then a zero gain game. And there is no ability through that process to start to control the costs. And we have two important elements. We have one, the understanding, and a lot of what was said here earlier by your staff is going to go a long ways into further understanding. Some of us have been more engaged than others over time. But I'm going to focus for just a minute on the controlling of the costs. The reason for that, of course, in 05-06 budget, the water quality program was about $59 million. It's next year, $120 million over a 9-year period. That's a substantial increase. That gives rise to wanting to try to control, not merely understand, some of those drivers. From the Irrigated Lands program, from 04 to present, it's gone up 400%. I expect it to go up more, although this year, I should acknowledge, it did not go up. So it's a funny time to be bitching about it. I'm sure that's crossed your mind. But if we look at the drivers through this period on water quality, programs haven't remarkably changed, certainly on irrigated lands. We are now on the threshold of going to groundwater, so it may hereafter change a bit. And the staff hasn't increased in numbers, so it isn't like we have runaway hiring, runaway program development that are the drivers. The drivers, and for brevity of time, if we just look at this last year as an example, the fees, the costs that were converted to fees were about $8.2 million additional dollars. About half of that, Gamma, the Delta program, which was a new fund driver, and 401 CERT were about half of it. Those factors you can perhaps influence at the state board, but not in dealing with your staff. It's got to be at your level, up to the Department of Finance, Governor's office, as to what is being put into the budget as a fee generator. Beyond that, the other half is salary, retirement, health, and pro rata. You can't change that. The most of that is negotiated. The pro rata, God can't change pro rata. So we need to be both realistic of what we possibly can influence and double dedicate ourselves in those areas, because that's the only place that we're going to make, some turn on the costs. Certainly, I found the staff project or program to be very impressive, and we will certainly actively participate in it. But that's going to bring further understanding. We need to work with you at the board, and to the extent that we're allowed to deal with the budgetary process, the BCPs, and I know that is the very confidential stuff, but that's what drives most of the cost increases.
Well, I think what we'll be looking for from everyone in this engagement is to come up with creative ways to cut costs versus dumping programs.
Oh, sure.
So that's where you need the two-way dialogue and understanding and sharing information with you all so that you can make those suggestions through the cost of compliance program or whatever. But I think
Clearly,